Rayna is a climate change expert. She has her master's in environmental management from Yale and has been working for years in the area of climate change. She chairs the Task Force on Climate Change in Saratoga Springs, where many of you who know Nan will guess that Nan is a friend of hers. And she also has testified for Congress and numerous other ways supporting climate change legislation. So I'm not going to drone on. Nan, did you want to say anything else before we turn it over?
I had to unmute. I just want to thank Rayna very, very much, because I know that she's hosting today a dinner party for her niece who's getting married. So I thought it was very nice of her to agree to do this.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you so much for being here, but we'll just turn it over to you and let you roll.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to just provide an overview of the science, why we haven't addressed climate change to date, what we need to do about it. And I'd love to hear from you anytime, and feel free to tell me to stop or slow down or interrupt me with questions. I invite you all. So this hell and high water idea actually came from the head of the climate change office here in New York State, but I liked his idea, so I stole it. It's bringing us hell and high water in the form of high temperatures, droughts, and fires, and high water from melting ice and sea level rise. So climate change and global warming refer to the same phenomenon. It's an interesting story from lots of different angles: science, politics, human behavior, and the outer limits of greed, if I may be so bold as to say so. Let's see. It's not advancing. Let's see. Okay, there we go. Right. So our troubles started with the Industrial Revolution, as we began to burn coal, oil, and later gas to power our machines. So why does burning fossil fuels cause trouble? Well, I'm delighted to tell you that the first person who figured out that carbon dioxide traps heat, it was a woman. And so that's why we have trouble. When we burn fossil fuels, we release carbon dioxide. And so we knew as early as 1856 that it traps heat in the atmosphere, along with water vapor. So it acts, pardon? Did anyone, or was that a sneeze? But of course, this lovely woman, Eunice Foote, did not get the credit. Instead, John Tyndall got the credit a few years later for the discovery. But as early as 1896, a Swedish scientist, Svante Arrhenius, realized that the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere affects global temperatures. So he also linked the burning of fossil fuels to global temperatures and predicted that the gases would heat up the earth eventually. He just thought it would take thousands of years. I wish it were. So this, in a nutshell, is the greenhouse effect. So this is what he realized. Normally, some of the sun's heat escapes back into outer space. It leaves. But when we put in these heat trapping gases, it's trapped. And so the gases accumulate, and so the heat accumulates. So it acts like a thicker and thicker blanket. So that's the fossil fuel emissions are not the only cause of climate change that man is responsible for. Land use change has also created carbon dioxide emissions. When we cut down trees or plow up soils, we release carbon dioxide. And so, of course, our modern energy, more machines require more energy, carbon-based fuels for natural gas and coal to power our electric grid. We have natural gas for furnaces in our homes and oil and gas for transportation. So half the emissions remain in the atmosphere, but soils and vegetation and the oceans absorb the other half. Oops, sorry. I'm using an old computer to show this, and it's moving. It has a mind of its own. So this chart, it looks kind of boring, but it really explains climate change in a nutshell. So you see these scientists up in the corner, although it's kind of blocking it, they have known what's in the atmosphere. They can dissolve these ice cores, and they know what the atmosphere has been like for the past 800,000 years. I think that's pretty phenomenal. This chart only goes back 400, but there are charts that go back 800. I just like this one better. And so what they have learned is not exactly lockstep, but pretty much. Whenever carbon dioxide in the atmosphere rises, the temperature of the earth rises, and when it falls, the temperature of the earth falls. So there are many complexities to science, but if you know these three things, you can pretty much deduce that that climate change would be inevitable. Carbon dioxide traps heat, burning fossil fuels releases it, and it stays in the atmosphere a long time. Basically, carbon dioxide is more or less the thermostat of the planet. The only problem is we can turn it up, but we can't turn it down. So the other gas that we worry about in addition to carbon dioxide is methane, which natural gas is methane. Cows emit it, as you may well know, rice paddies emit it, all decaying organic emit methane. Wetlands emit it. It's a natural process, and we don't want to disturb wetlands. They do wonderful work for us. But you can see carbon dioxide has been rising steadily. Nan's from Hawaii. She'll be glad to know that we have a laboratory on Mauna Loa that measures the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere every year. And we know that it's rising absolutely. It's confirmed by other measurements in other countries. The issue is that it only takes a small degree of increase in temperature to change everything. All systems are affected by increasing carbon dioxide and the heat that it traps. The other competing gas is methane. We used to say it was secondary, but it's becoming more urgent to reduce our methane emissions because for two reasons. One, as you can see, it traps heat much more efficiently than carbon dioxide, 84 times more efficiently in the short run. And nitrous oxide, another gas, traps it 300 times better. But methane is a rising concern because it's rising in the atmosphere because we didn't know that there were sources that were contributing to methane. So everything in red here contributes to climate change. And you can see that carbon dioxide is the largest, they call it climate forcer, and methane is the second. But a 3% leak in methane emissions make it as bad as coal. So while we thought natural gas would be a nice transition off of coal, but because there's so many leaks in the whole system, it's becoming as bad as coal. We know now, we have the surveillance to see that there are leaks in the pipelines, in the fracking wells, all over the world. So a 3% leak in methane makes it as bad as coal, as I just said. So we can no longer expect to use natural gas as a transition fuel. So they're heroes and villains. I consider this guy a hero of mine. This is Al Gore brought NASA scientist Jim Hansen to Congress in 1988. A scientist actually warned Lyndon Johnson in 1965 about climate change. But this was the first time Congress had heard about it. And he warned that even 1 or 2 degrees of increase in global temperature could cause radical change. He said that throughout geologic history, when there have only been 1 or 2 degrees of fluctuation, we've lost half our species of plants and animals on the earth. So a tiny degree in fluctuation of global average temperature means a big deal for the planet. So I just have to put this in. I don't know if you can see it, but there I am. So the UN heard it. The World Meteorological Organization created the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's still the world's leading authority on climate issues. Hundreds of scientists all over the world were asked to review all the science and answer, are temperatures rising and how will it affect the planet? So if you know that Congress is aware of that temperatures are rising and that fossil fuels might be to blame, and you know the UN is beginning to investigate and create scientific bodies, who do you think would start to worry about that? Are there any guesses? Well, yes. So if you're producing fossil fuels, you're going to worry about someone who might want to limit them. And in fact, Exxon knew about climate change 40 years ago. You can find on the internet, if you like, a senior scientist in 1977 wrote a letter to upper management, and it's very clear and compelling. There's nothing wishy-washy about it. But they knew. And because they knew, they didn't want things to change. So they began to fund disinformation. So to confuse the public, to confuse policymakers, especially ExxonMobil and the Koch brothers, but there are many other players. And this is fascinating. This Merchants of Doubt book, Naomi Oreskes wrote, she found that they even created a playbook. It was called Bad Science, a resource book. And they told companies how to counter scientific information, how to make it sound doubtful or dubious. They even provided scientists with credentials. They say, you can call him up and he'll testify. The same strategy, it's called the tobacco playbook. I mean, by other outsiders. And they even have, they use the strategy with asbestos, ozone, acid rain. They even use the same scientists with climate change. So it's a well-known strategy, and there's actually a playbook on how to do it. However, the scientists kept working. And by 2007, the IPCC had amassed all of the science, and they told policymakers that climate change was here. And in fact, they won the Nobel Peace Prize for it. It was an enormous report, and they were able to say climate change is here. It's unequivocal. It's clear that every year it gets hotter and hotter. And so they can finally say that 97 to 99% of scientists agree climate change is underway. It's caused by humans, and it's going to be bad. So this one is a chart. So the scientists recommended that in order for humans to be able to live on the planet, to make it habitable, they chose arbitrarily somewhat the 2 degrees centigrade of warming as the limit to which humans could adapt. So they said to keep it to 2 degrees, don't let the atmospheric concentrations go over 350 parts per million. You've heard of Bill McKibben's 350.org, perhaps. Well, that's where that came from. However, it's already 419. So we blew past safe a long time ago. The problem is that there's a time lag. So the heating we're feeling now is from emissions 20, 30, 50 years ago. The heat is in the atmosphere, but it takes a while for the effects of the heat to show up. So the last time there was this much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, there were saber-toothed tigers on the land, and sea levels were 100 feet higher than they are now. So one could extrapolate that the Earth might catch up to that former heat in those former conditions. So it's no surprise then that the latest report from the scientists was appropriately alarming. This was issued in 2022. They didn't expect all of the Earth systems to react so strongly to 1 degree of warming. We've had about 1 degree so far. And because we've delayed, we've had more warming in the pipeline that we can't forestall. We can't do anything about it. So I've been reading climate change for 30 years. And honestly, it's a total shock to everyone at how quickly the Earth is warming. So it's warming up relentlessly. And there are many effects of it, and I don't have time to go into them all today, but I'll talk about a few of them. And the most obvious is heat. So this year we had record-breaking heat. There was a heat dome over the US in July, and oddly enough in September, where you don't usually see these big heat waves. We had one in California and over the West, breaking over 1,000 heat records. And heat waves are the big killer. It kills more people than any other single climate effect. They also affect the poor disproportionately because a lot of people don't have air conditioning. So this is an especially interesting chart, I thought. So this is Business Insider. This is not Greenpeace. This is a business publication. And they show that all these dark places on the globe it represents 45 degrees Celsius, which is 113 degrees. If you have 113 degrees and 115 with 50% humidity is not habitable for any length of time. It's not possible for people to spend a long time outdoors. So people can't work outside. And a lot of people have inadequate homes. So it represents a lot of human misery to have this kind of heat. And this heat is projected to increase over the next, New York projects so till 2050, but really there's no endpoint of how hot we can get. And again, the unfortunate things is that we're committed because there's inertia in the climate system. There's this delay. We're too hot now, but we have a lot more heat in the pipeline, at least 1 more degree. So their health, in addition to in addition to heat waves, there are other health effects of climate change. Tick and mosquito-borne diseases. Nan can confirm that in our area, Lyme disease is basically a pandemic. Huge, most ticks carry Lyme disease. There are also negative effects of air pollution, heart and lung diseases. Even when sunlight hits air pollution, it creates ground level ozone, which is terrible for human health. Even a small exposure can increase hospitalizations. There's also heat stress. Then, of course, waterborne diseases and weather disasters like cholera and typhoid fever. It's also a disease multiplier. This is a new article published in August of 2022. Climate change exacerbates 2/3 of pathogenic diseases affecting humans. And I don't know if you remember hearing, but COVID traveled on air pollution particles. And interestingly, this last one, mental health, I just read yesterday that college students are beginning to request climate stress counseling, that they're stressed, that climate, certainly the young people know more about climate change than most people our age, and they're worried about it and are feeling the stress of it. So among the other negative effects are the oceans. Oceans have absorbed 93% of the global warming heat, which has protected us from feeling the higher temperatures. However, the heat's damaged the ocean ecosystems, the coral reefs, and there's a limit to the amount of heat the oceans can absorb. And 1 billion people rely on protein from the ocean. Also, a consequence of warmer oceans is more extreme weather. Global warming intensifies what we call the hydrologic cycle. So you get more evaporation much higher into the atmosphere. And so then it comes crashing down in the form of extreme precipitation and heavy weather of all kinds. Plus, warmer temperatures cause more and stronger convection, which means stronger winds. So we have more extreme events more often. And too much precipitation when we don't want it, and too little when we do. In fact, some places you have it very close together. California had too little, a drought for a long, long time, and then suddenly major storms that are causing flooding. So this year has really been dramatic. There have been record-breaking weather events all over the world this summer, high temps, flooding, and this colossal flood in Pakistan. I don't know if you read about it, but the combination of the intense rains, which is 500% greater than average, combined with melting glacier water to create a massive inland sea. I've never heard of such a thing. Last year in the US alone, there were $20 billion weather and climate disasters, which represents a lot of human misery again. So it follows, I'm sure you can make sense, that heat, drought, and severe weather lead to food shortages. Damaged crops and reduced yields are inevitable, but the unpredictability of the climate is also very hard on farmers. They no longer know what an average rainfall will be, and there's not even a new normal. There's no normal. In addition, the pests have, thrive under a warmer climate, and that's another challenge for farmers. So along with heat and drought, we have water shortages, which follows. We have this incredible drought in the Pacific Northwest, and I don't have a time on that, but I got that from the US Drought Monitor. And the West is getting drier and drier, which unfortunately NASA thinks could be a multi-100-year trend. But the lack of water also creates energy shortages in the West because the the dams of Lake Mead and Lake Powell don't have enough water to create electricity. And this summer, also, I'd like you to notice this summer, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island had severe drought, which is very unusual. They had to impose water restrictions. So drought is becoming much more common and severe. And not just in the US, China had a dreadful drought that dried up a whole inland lake and has damaged their crops. So the US Department of Defense is worried about climate change. They know a lot about it. They've studied it. Why do you think they're worried? Anybody want to guess? Anybody? Speak up.
A massive social upheaval.
Exactly. Food and water shortages, diseases, disputes over refugees and resources. And believe me, climate refugees have begun moving. There are people in our area that have left California because of their domestic climate refugees. But women and children are disproportionately affected as they hit the road. It's just a miserable life. Refugee camps are dreadful, but it also could lead to conflict. You can imagine if people lack food and water, they will do anything to get it. The Defense Department's also worried because they know we're reaching some tipping points for losing some buffers, like the Amazon. In spirit of full disclosure, my son-in-law wrote this article for National Geographic. He did the scientific research. The Amazon used to absorb carbon dioxide, so it provided a buffer, but now it's so degraded, it's been burned and cut, and now it is emitting greenhouse gases. It's begun to contribute to climate change. So it's really upsetting to me to picture the beautiful Amazon in that condition. But the oceans are also under deep threat. We said that oceans absorb heat and that damages ecosystems under the ocean, but in addition, it absorbs carbon dioxide. So the oceans have absorbed enough carbon dioxide to change the chemistry of all the oceans. It's now more acidic than it used to be. It's not acid, but it is more acidic than it used to be, so that shell-forming organisms have trouble forming their shells. And so if the bottom of the food chain is threatened, if they can't form their shells, everything above it that relies on it for food, we will have cascading effects and extinctions. So Jeremy Jackson, phenomenal scientist, has some pretty grim predictions about the oceans. Coral reefs too are threatened. They can't form under acid conditions. So it's pretty amazing to think that humans have done this. We've totally changed the chemistry of the ocean. And so we haven't changed the total chemistry, but we have changed the chemistry of all the oceans. Also, the Defense Department knows that changes can be sudden and nonlinear. So we can have abrupt ice sheet collapses, abrupt ocean circulation changes. In fact, this northern circulation they call the conveyor belt has already slowed a little bit because of the melting ice in Greenland. And so if that slows dramatically, Europe will actually be cooler, at least for a while, but it's something people watch. Another tipping point are the methane clath rates, and we're already seeing some action, unfortunately. The melting permafrost that's different from the clath rates. The melting permafrost is emitting methane and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, melting apace. But also in Siberia, there are these, it took them a while to figure out what was causing this. These are big explosions from methane clath rates in the tundra that are melting, and then they just erupt into basically methane bombs into the atmosphere, releasing large amounts of methane. And there's no way to stop it. There's no way to stop the thawing. So it could cause rapid climate change is the worry. The ice has reached a tipping point. No one thought that ice would melt this quickly. I was told when I started giving talks in 2000 that, no, don't talk about Greenland. It'll take 1,000 years for Greenland to melt. But no, the ice has been much more sensitive to temperature changes. That and the fact that we didn't realize that in Antarctica, the ocean under the ice shelves is warming it from beneath, which is accelerating warming. And so the big concern, it's been in the news lately, I encourage you to follow this, is the Thwaites Glacier, because they're now predicting it could melt in the very near future, within 5 years, for example. And that would cause sea levels to rise 2 feet, which is huge for cities on the coastline. But also behind it are glaciers that if they were, if the dam of this glacier leaves, other ones could melt quickly and move into the sea, causing rapid sea level rise. So Ohio State glaciologists said if there's going to be a climate catastrophe, it's probably going to start in Thwaites Glacier, which is here. So keep your eye on that. It's been in the news, but it will continue to be in the news. And there's another major shelf that's under threat, but that will be a much slower melt. But not in the terribly distant future. But it's just, we can't unmelt. Once the ice starts melting, you can't stop it. That's the concern. As a thought exercise, this is what the world would look like if all the ice melted. That would take a long time. That's not going to happen in our lifetimes. But I think that even in most of our lifetimes, we're going to see some sea level rise that will be worrisome. So what now? What do we do about it? There are people who say we have the tools to get to net zero and we need to use them. So we have to stop. Basically, scientists say we have to really stop all of our emissions. And can we do it? It's not going to be easy. I'm not going to say it's easy. We have to decrease our energy consumption, reduce our use, promote energy efficiency, promote renewable energy. We have to electrify everything and then power the grid with green power. This is an idea that's come to the fore in the past 10 years. And we have to improve our grid. How do we have all these electrical, if we're going to electrify everything, we need a bigger, stronger, more modern grid with high voltage transmission lines. And we need to manage our forests and lands for carbon storage. We cannot do it on the personal level. We need federal action, but we can, as citizens, encourage our representatives to support a price on carbon. And I'll talk about more of these more. Citizens United, support renewable energy, upgrade the grid, and support international efforts on climate change. How'd you like my little ding, my little cash register? We've said that climate change causes a lot of damage, and yet we continue to allow polluters to dump their greenhouse gases in the atmosphere without paying for these damages. It's the World Economic Forum in 2016 said it's the biggest threat to the economy. So a partial remedy to that is to put a price on carbon, and there are various ways of doing that. These Republican elders suggested a carbon tax to the White House. James Baker, George Shultz, who's now deceased, but Henry Paulson all approached the Trump administration suggesting that it would be an important thing to do, but it was not received well. And also businessmen know that, business people, men and women, know that we need to reduce our emissions. The head of Walmart was part of that group. So there is a bipartisan climate leadership council that's recommending a carbon fee and dividend. And I like the carbon fee and dividend idea because it's fairer. It would protect the low and moderate income people. Basically, the idea is that you raise the price on energy, and so corporations would emit less. If it's expensive to emit, you quit emitting. It would also just help the whole cascading effects of climate change. But it would also create a lot of jobs in renewable energy efficiency sectors. So if there's anything, my big message today would be to support a price on carbon. It could really be a jump start on reducing emissions. But of course, some people do not want a price on carbon because they're mostly funded by the fossil fuel companies, these disinformation campaigns. So they have friendly sounding names like the American Heartland and American Enterprise Institute, but they're fighting tooth and nail. A big issue for us is Citizens United because it allows a lot of dark money to fund corporate campaign spending. It rolled back 100 years of campaign finance laws. As someone put it, it gives us the worst government money can buy. Right now, a small group of hedge fund managers, Koch brothers, billionaires shape elections disproportionately. There are also large platforms for misinformation. There's actually people watching how much information there is on different media outlets. The good news is that when you have radio stories that report that Republicans are worried about climate change, people realize it can be a bipartisan issue. Still, relative to Fox News, the platform is small. More people are coming to understand that climate change is a problem. That's good news. But a weakness I can attest to, because I work at this level, the state and local action is just not robust enough. I mean, state and local governments know they need to act, but they have a hard time getting into gear and pulling it off. But we can, as citizens, encourage our local representatives, state and local representatives, to promote energy efficiency and renewable energy and get prepared for the climate change that we know is going to happen. Plus, a lot of emissions occur on the local level. Energy efficiency projects are implemented in the local level, transportation options, and so on. So a lot happens on the local level that affects climate change. This is what I do. This is me in my position as chair of my committee, and we were promoting solar power. So I just would hope that all of you would consider what you might do in your own lives. This guy really has promulgated energy efficiency for decades. I get a kick out of him. This is Amory Levin's he was the head of Rocky Mountain Institute. I encourage you to go to their website, the rmi.org, for energy ideas. But he's been saying we could save so much money. It's the largest, cheapest, safest, cleanest way to address the crisis. We waste a lot of energy. That is wasted energy you see coming out of that house. And I could walk you down the street any winter night and show you that kind of how energy's leaving houses. We need air sealing, insulation, lighting, upgrades. Building codes are very important because buildings have long lives and they use a lot of energy. But we need outreach programs because most people don't know much about energy efficiency. Local benefits of energy efficiency are that they keep our dollars in our own community. Instead of me mailing my money off to National Grid in the UK, if I keep my money in my pocket, I spend it in my local economy. And energy efficiency also employs a lot of people. Another idea is to electrify everything. By green electricity, we need to electrify our heating and cooling, our vehicles, and communities can even buy green power for their entire community if companies are offering those kinds of schemes. You can see, I'm sure you've been aware of the move toward electrifying vehicles, but all kinds of vehicles are now electric. School buses, heavy duty trucks, front loaders, tractors. There's nothing that can't come in an electric form anymore. Although right now, supply chain makes them hard to get. We do have a problem though with charging infrastructure. We have a bit of a chicken and egg problem. We need more charging stations if EVs are to become prevalent, certainly. We can also promote non-motorized transport. The easiest thing to do for the climate is to not get into a car. Walking, biking, good sidewalks and trails help promote that. And also public transportation not only allows one vehicle to move a lot of people, it allows poor people to get around and have jobs they might not otherwise be able to access. We really need to reduce methane emissions, as I've mentioned before. We have to stop using natural gas, which is not going to be easy. There are massive leaks from old infrastructure. We need to move to all other cooking. We also need to compost our organic matter and protect the wetlands in our community because they perform a lot of ecosystem services for us. This is a new study that came out of Stanford recently that shows that our gas stoves release methane even when they're off into our homes. And so methane is bad for the environment, but also very bad for human health. So that was a really interesting study, and it's pretty dramatic. Moreover, methane leaks can explode homes. So this, in 2018 in Lawrence, Mass, 39 homes exploded because of methane leaks in the community. So there are other good reasons in addition to climate to move off of natural gas. There are a number of different kinds of renewable energy we can switch to. However, the more prevalent are clearly wind and solar. And the prices have been dropping. Access is improving. There's a lot of potential wind and solar in the United States. And now we even have utility scale solar developing. There are two impediments to wind and solar, and that is storage. We need to store the energy. So when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, we still have energy. And also, if we can erect a wind farm in North Dakota, we can get it to Massachusetts if we have high voltage transmission lines. So that's not going to be an easy undertaking. So we have some pretty big hurdles, but it's doable, but not easy. Also, green jobs, they are better and more jobs in the green economy. And I get a kick out of this. I don't know why. It amuses me that the fastest growing job category in the US through 2024 is the wind turbine service technician. Who knew? I sure didn't. But anyway, lots of well-paying jobs. So I can tell you from personal experience, having talked to scientists, that the scientists are very alarmed. I hope you can see, I hope I've made a case for that. it's hitting the planet much faster. And Nature is the premier scientific publication. And so there was recently an article saying we're going to have to resort to civil disobedience. But in fact, they already have. There's a history of that. This is my dean, Gus Beth, of my program. He's a Southern gentleman. It amuses me that he got arrested protesting a pipeline, as did Jim Hansen. I can't see that part of my screen, so I don't know if you can see him. He got arrested too, protesting the pipeline. And he's a very soft-spoken, mild-mannered guy. Let's see. So whatever you may think about your politics in terms from a climate perspective, the Inflation Reduction Act is the first significant climate change legislation. So I can end on a positive note. And the Tax Foundation and the Budget Office says it's going to raise our federal revenue and it won't increase the deficit. So that's good news. It's still not enough, not by a long shot, but it is a first step. And we did not get a price on carbon, which we still badly need, but at least it's a beginning and has created a little bit of optimism. You know, it shouldn't be a partisan issue. John McCain and John Kerry saw eye to eye on climate change. So because there's no planet B, I hope we can work together aggressively to mitigate climate change. So that's my conclusion. And I hope I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Super. Thank you so much, Rayna. And yeah, this is great. We'll come back on the main screen. And so remember to unmute yourself and just go ahead and speak your question.
I have a question. What's happening to the price on carbon? Were they trying to pass a law or what? Where
it would
is
be it would be a policy. Yes. There are different schemes. It's sort of nowhere. They tried to promulgate it in the IRA that just passed, but we're getting closer to it. But until we have, until we have campaign finance reform, we're not going to have overwhelming votes for a price on carbon. You know, and it's our fault, really. It's very expensive to run a campaign, and so politicians look for where the money is, and the fossil fuel industries have it, so they contribute a lot, and they expect you to vote accordingly. So we're going to need at least more than 50 Democrats or some Republicans who, and there have been moderate Republicans who care about this, as you could see. I just hope they will feel free to speak up. There is a price on carbon in Europe, though, but it's very low. And it's got to reach a threshold to be effective.
And say a little more about what that is exactly.
The threshold?
Well, price of carbon, is it increasing the price on those types of fuels or yeah?
Well, it would, but the carbon fee and dividend idea, and I encourage you to go to the Citizens Climate Lobby. They explain their idea, which I think is a really good one. Though I think everyone's trending toward the fee and dividends. So you pay a fee, like the gas is more expensive, your natural gas heating bill is higher, but you get a dividend back in the mail. You get a payback, and they've arranged it so it's very simple. It doesn't create a huge bureaucracy. It's not that hard to do. And so those people who make less get more back. You know, the super rich might not get so much back in the mail, you know, but the poor, it's graded by income. You get more back the less you make. So, but you get the message when you drive up to the gas pump, it's higher, or when you pay your gas bill, it's higher. So you get the message, it's more expensive, but you're not hurt because you get the money back. So that's the idea.
Thank you. Who else? Anybody? It was a lot of material. My head is frankly spinning.
I'm sorry, I know. I want to tell everybody everything.
I wonder if I could just add.
I just think it was frightening to hear all of it, and it was so much to absorb.
Yep.
Yeah, David, were you trying to make a comment?
I was just going to add to an excellent presentation that
Thank you.
the province of British Columbia in Canada has a carbon tax
Yes.
and a carbon
That's true.
price. It's had it for years. It's gone through a succession of changes of governments and parties and continued that carbon tax. So we do have an example in North America. It's very hard to replicate for a lot of reasons beyond just lobbying. But what the curious question I had, Rayna, is I don't hear climate change as much of an issue in the midterms as I thought it would be, given the dramatic nature of what you just presented. And maybe you could explain that.
Well, that's an excellent point. Now I can tell you what some old thinking was in 2016. There was a group, a bipartisan group called Risky Business. And they put together a presentation and presented to large corporations, big businesses about the dangers of climate change. But they encouraged candidates not to talk about it in approaching elections because they were afraid that it would be used by the other side to discredit the candidates, because there's so much, the average person doesn't have deep knowledge of climate change. It's easy to confuse people. We have decades to show that. So I don't know if that's operating. I don't know the answer to that. But I think some will as we get closer, but not all of them. I think some people are just afraid of the controversy it could raise, which is too bad. Because the other thing that the Yale Project on Climate Change Communication discovered is people don't talk about climate change because they think other people don't believe in it. But in fact, most people do. So the more we talk about it, the better it is for people to understand that we're all worried about it and we need to do something about it. But it's a good question about the candidates. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if they didn't start bringing it up, because thank you. I'm sorry, your name, Paul. Yes, it's scary. I mean, I am afraid. I really am. I don't know why this Thwaites Glacier that could cause radical change in a few years isn't more in the news and being discussed. That is cataclysmic, 2 to 3 feet for coastal cities. And when you have a storm surge, like Hurricane Sandy wasn't even a hurricane when it hit, it was a tropical storm. And the damage was caused by the storm surge, which the higher the sea levels are, the bigger the surge. So it's, I don't know, I agree. It's just, I feel like I'm in Berlin in 1933 and everything, people are going to bars and having a good time, but there's impending doom. It's just crazy. Anyway.
Rayna, I would urge you to make this presentation on 60 Minutes and to certainly get to one of their people to be able to offer that, because it's remarkable information.
What could help is if all of you would write the networks. I might be able to find links to that and say, why aren't we hearing more about this? They will respond to inquiries by viewers. So we need to urge them to talk about it.
Rayna,
Yes.
There's a sculpture in Germany that's basically a pool, of water. And there are these statues all talking to each other. And it says politicians discussing global warming.
Oh, yeah.
But
So it's an area that I admit I haven't done my homework on. And you kind of hear, so besides, my question is this, besides the fossil fuel industry, who clearly has a, big stake in this, what are the arguments against climate change? I mean, it seems like I've heard snippets over time, but I'd love to hear your comment on that.
Okay, that one, yes, that's a good question. There is no unifying theory on the other side. There is no serious science on the other side at this point. There are a few odd scientists that promote odd ideas, but they're very different from one another. They don't say the same thing. For a while, the fossil fuel companies were saying, oh, it's sun activity. Well, pardon me, I think I have earned a little sarcasm at this point. I'm saying, oh, scientists forgot the sun. They know exactly what solar activity is. They monitor it constantly. In fact, solar activity is decreasing. So right now, there is zero valid science on the other side of climate change. There might be some arguments about certain aspects or how much or how fast, there are, areas of disagreement or things that need to continue to be studied. But you won't find serious, credible, peer-reviewed scientists on the other side right now.
This is Hardy. I hope you can hear me. I have a question on carbon pricing.
Mhm.
and you've kind of thrown it out. It's something needs to be done. There's a couple places where it's being utilized. Give me the pricing, the cost increase that you see that would be necessary for an effective carbon pricing, not just let's roll it out and it's going to cost a little bit. What to have the impact you want to have it have? How expensive will carbon become?
That's an excellent question. So there is a calculation called the social cost of carbon, which is supposed to sort of be a dollar figure for the damages. And it's a little less than $50. But that social cost of carbon does not include ocean acidification. It does not include melting permafrost. So it grossly underestimates the damages, in other words. However, that has been what policy has been hung on, is that social cost of carbon. So different groups like the Climate Leadership Council and Citizens Climate Lobby all propose starting a little bit low and then increasing the amount over time. But to be effective, I would say it needs to be $50 minimum, and really 100 would be better. But I mean, right, there are people who say, just give us any price, let's get started. And in fact, there is also some carbon pricing in China. So that's a good question. That's my best answer, is it's tied to the social cost of carbon, but that's an underestimate. So people are just saying, you might go to the websites to see what people propose and how big the increments are. But it's an important question.
Well, what is it in Canada?
I don't know. What is it? Would someone in the chat see?
David?
Well, they just upped the fee in April from $45 to $50 per unit. It's been working and tested, and it's doable, and it doesn't. That's a resource extraction province of Canada.
Yes, it
So
is.
it's being done again through government changes, both center, left, and right. So this is a workable deal. I'm just not sure the incentives work in the United States, because the people who get that carbon tax money are the legislature if it's not a carbon tax, and so they like it. They like to get the money. So it's a question of the incentive structure. But the idea is a great idea, and it's proven. It's a proven concept.
Oh, thank you for bringing that up. I omitted that. Thank you very much. Yes. What do you do with those revenues? Yeah. So the idea is you use those carbon revenues to reduce your dependence on fossil fuels. But as you just mentioned, it's hard for state legislatures to keep their hands, and federal, it's hard to keep your hands off that money. They see a big pot of money and they spend it. That's happened in New York State already. We have a little bit of a fee with, there's some carbon trading among power plants. And yeah, the governor raids the fund every once in a while, but still it's worth a shot. But I'm glad to hear in Canada that those are appropriate prices, effective prices. I'm really glad to hear it.
Hardy, any follow-up on that, or are you good?
No, I think I understand it. It's good to hear it's being used at a reasonable price level in Canada. What about the subject of remedial action to take to prepare us for the change that's coming?
Yeah, that's very important. That's another whole adaptation it's referred to. How do we adapt to the climate change we know we're going to have? My first response to adaptation is we have to do it. We know it's coming, but adapt to what? Because it's going to be a constantly changing baseline. So we know sea level is going to rise. So what do? Well, people are building sea walls 2 and 3 and 4 feet, but those will be overcome. And then all that money is invested in a seawall when actually we need to move away from the coast. We know that water is going to be a huge issue. I'm trying to get the city council in our community to really focus on water availability. We have a lot of water in the Northeast, and yet we've had water restrictions this summer. Again, drought alternating, too much rain, too little rain. And everybody's going to have that sometime in their own community. So water's a big issue. Food is another big issue. So one of the leading agricultural experts in the world, Jason Clay, thinks that a lot of agriculture is going to move indoors because of the terrible weather and the terrible pests that come with climate change. And I have seen some indoor agriculture. It's really cool. I mean, it's doable, but I don't know if it's doable on a scale we'll need. So I don't know, but that is one of the waves of the future. So there's a lot we need to do to adapt. Again, my big point I want to make is that it's going to be constantly changing. We're going to have to constantly adapt. Oh, another thing is, you know how geothermal or the ground source heat pump is based on the fact that the earth is much cooler. It's like a constant, I don't know, 54 degrees or something like that. So in China, in their latest heat wave, there were restaurants underground where people would go to get cool. And I think we're going to be, that eventually will be an option, is more underground basement living or whatever, because it's cooler. We don't need air conditioning. It's just naturally cool. There's a lot to talk about in that realm, but it's an excellent question, Harney.
Yeah. And even the conversion to other types of fuel, if we're going to shift off of carbon. I know we had some friends of ours tried to go, off the grid, and they did solar. Well, but they forgot they were out in New Mexico, and in the winter it got really, really cold. And so they lost all of their capability because batteries won't store it. Right. So there's a lot yet to be done. And
That's
then
right.
we have to figure out how to adapt to that. Right.
That's right.
So,
That's
yeah.
right. One tiny bit of good news is that I saw the very innovative air conditioning that's cheap and would be accessible to a lot of the world. And we can't use our energy hog air conditioners all over the world for the heat that's coming. But so there's a lot of innovation. I think this will spur innovation. We've got to have it. We're going to need out of the box answers.
Mm-hmm.
How about carbon capture?
Yes. So that's a tough nut. So I have always been in favor of it. Klaus Lochner at the University of Arizona did some really cool work just passively. You can put up this like goalpost kind of looking thing in your backyard, and it passively captures carbon that moves over it, but it turns into rock. So most of carbon capture, when you talk about it, it's capturing carbon from industrial processes and storing them deep underground. There are lots of issues with it. At first, I thought it was really important. There are also extractions just from the air that I thought were very important. But there was an article in the New York Times recently by some MIT scientists who said that they used to be in the industry. They used to do it. They used to advocate for it. And now they think that it's because wind and solar are so inexpensive, it doesn't make sense to do that anymore. And that it's a waste of federal dollars to focus on it. Instead, we need to be focusing on just transitioning to the renewable energy that we already have. But I think one day we're going to have to. You've heard the Project Drawdown. I think there are going to be big efforts to use soils to whatever the soils store, to leave it in the store, help soil store more. In fact, my son-in-law is working on that project to maximize the storage in nature. But I also think that one day we're going to have to figure out how to pull it out of the atmosphere. I just would trust these two guys from MIT because they were in the industry, but before that article, I would have been in support of it. But it's a little bit complicated. And again, money is key to some major decisions.
Interesting. Well, we have time for probably one more question, if anybody has one. Going.
Thank you all. You're a great audience. Terrific questions. Really, I'm impressed.
We'll let Rayna get off to her planning her dinner, which is
like 20 people who are coming for dinner soon.
Yeah. But thanks to Nan, who is a friend of yours, for lining you up today. That was really very, very interesting.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate your interest.
Rayna, you were terrific. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you so much. Feel free to send me questions if you like. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.